Hello, Marshall.
Hello. How's it going, Alexandra?
It's really good today, I must say. And uh, we have talked about your book, your latest book, last time, and today we are going to talk more about the little book, Planet X and Colburn Bible. But could you could you tell why you have written this book, the latest book?
I wrote the book for people who are in awareness, and most people in awareness have big hearts and small wallets. They can't afford to spend $500,000 to build a bunker, and they get frustrated. They go, "What's the point of knowing what's coming when I cannot afford to buy bullets, beans, and bunkers?" And so, surviving the Planet X tribulation is a tool for them. What I'm saying is that they need to become involved with survival communities that are going to form. And the ones that are going to be the most successful, in my opinion, will be faith based organizations, churches. And churches have three distinct advantages. One, they have an established chain of command, which is important. Yes, they're political. Everything is. The second thing is that they have a good knack and a good history for disaster logistics. And it could take 30 years to build a library for a church, but in 3 days, they're out taking care of people after a storm or a flood. Um, then the third is a diversity of skill sets. And that's really important because there's a lot of skill sets for survival that are not marketable skill sets in the job market per se. Where does a grandmother who knows how to grow herbs and to make poultices, where's she going to go find a job doing that? Who's going to pay her to do that? But yet, in terms of the tribulation, those are exactly the kind of skill sets you need. So the book is really teaching them how to become involved with a community as someone in awareness, which means their role is to be a teacher, a mentor, and a comforter. Not a leader, but a teacher, mentor, comforter role. And people who are in awareness have a hard time grasping one of their greatest advantages, and that will be their countenance. What does your face look like? All right. And when things really get bad, a lot of people are starting to get worried and they're coming into awareness. And this is not going to be something that, for like most people in awareness, happens over the better part of a lifetime, several years. So they have time to digest it, to chew it, to work their way through it. Most of the people in the world, when they come into awareness, it's going to be getting hit in the face with a bucket of ice water. It's just going to be a sudden shock. They're going to have a hard time dealing with it. And people do not respond well in those kind of circumstances. Um, and there's going to be all kinds of wild-eyed theories and people venting off personal issues and just a lot of bad behavior. And here's where someone who is in awareness can go to the leader of a church. And they're immediately just standing there. That leader's going to see a difference between them and other people because they're not going to look happy about what's going on. But they're not going to be looking like they just got hit in the face with a bucket of ice water either. And they're going to have a calm countenance. They're going to be accepting of what's going on, and they're going to be knowledgeable. And so they can begin mentoring at the leadership level. And the book is written in a way that I take the reader and I say, all right, we're going to role play. I'm going to be the mentor, you're going to be the student. And I then take the reader that way so that they can actually see the mentoring process and the kind of knowledge that they need to share, because it is a very big book. You hand it to somebody and they're in the middle of a crisis. They don't have time to read something that big and thick and informative. But you walk up and let's say you have 2 copies of the book in hand. One that's, got Post-it notes, dog-eared, you got pencil marks on it and everywhere. That's your personal copy. And then you have a clean copy and you hand it to the leader of that faith-based organization and just say, you need a plan. Here's a plan. I understand everything in this book thoroughly and can explain anything to you. And I will be more than happy to be at your service. And once you do that, you establish that level of rapport with the church leader. Now you've come into that organization from the top as opposed to the bottom. And which means that as you cement that relationship, as you establish your viability, that puts you in a position then to ask the leadership of that church, well, can my family come? I'd like for them to survive with me as well. If you're a valuable person because you understand things and how it all works, then they're going to say yes. Well, because otherwise, what are they going to do? Say, we want your information, but your family can die? They're going to say that. You've chosen the wrong people to extend your services to. Move on down the road. So that's what the book's really about. It's just trying to help people in awareness who are going, I don't have money for bullets, beans, and bunkers. And try to explain to them that's not necessary that you have the money. What's necessary is that you know where to find your opportunities and how to pursue them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And today we would talk about the other little book.
Greg Jenner's book. And this book has always been, for many years, I used to call it the cup of tea book. Because people would ask me about this and that. And I'd just say, Greg Jenner wrote this wonderful book. You can read it in an afternoon or a day, depending on how fast you like to read. And that's not a lot of hours to commit. And after that, you're going to know if this topic is your cup of tea or not.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not your cup of tea, you've only lost a few hours. And you had an interesting read. What he does is that he goes in, and the Colburn Bible, which I publish, is an ancient text. And what I'll do is bring up I'll share my screen and show you guys here. All right. And now, this is a website, the Colburn Bible, and it's Colburn, KOLBRIN.com. Here's what the cover of the book looks like. And the Colburn Bible was originally written, the first part of it, about 3,600 years ago, around the same time that the 5 books of Moses were being written. And then the second part of it was written about a few decades after the crucifixion of Yeshua. And the first part is the Egyptian texts, and we call that the Bronze Book. This is, we call it the Egyptian texts of the Bronze Book. And then the second part of it is the Coal Book, which was written by the Celts. And so you have the Celtic texts of the Cole book, all right? And they are from very different, points of time. The original book, the original Colburn Bible, was part of a larger text, and it was encyclopedic in size, called the Great Book. The Egyptians wrote this. And the reason why the Egyptians wrote the Great Book was after the Exodus, they're going, how is it this little Jewish God beat our entire pantheon of gods? All right. And they're trying to figure it out. So in America, after 9/11, we had the 9/11 report. We're trying to figure out, how did these guys do this to us? All right. And so that's really what set it out for the ancient Egyptians, was they're trying to figure out, how did these Jews do it to us? So they were sending their scribes out to the very edges of their trading realm. And during the day, they're counting bricks and fish or whatever they're doing, commerce. But then in the evenings, they would interview elders and shamans, so forth, in these different cultures they were working with, to find out stories about their folklore, because the goal for the Egyptians was somehow they would find a clue that would not get them to the God of the Hebrews, but rather they wanted to find the God that was above the God of the Hebrews. And this is the way they were thinking. It didn't work out for them. But the Great Book was massive. It was 20 volumes. Unfortunately, most of it was destroyed when the Romans sacked the Library of Alexandria. And however, the Egyptians were trading papyrus. Egyptian papyrus was very, very much in demand around the world at that time. And they were working with the Phoenicians. Now, the Phoenicians had the most impressive sailing fleet. They were the first people that could navigate by the stars. Other people, other cultures, their mariners followed the coastlines. And so by following a coastline, it takes a long time to get where you're going, because you can't take a straight line, so to speak, as the crow flies. But the Phoenicians could, because they were navigating on the stars. And their range was as far north as Great Britain and South Africa to the south from the Mediterranean. And the Phoenicians were in what is now Lebanon. And their ships were the most advanced ships of the day, far ahead of everybody else. And but the Phoenicians ran afoul of the Roman Empire, and they were absolutely wiped off the face of the earth. The Romans didn't have a good reputation for playing well with others. And so much for the Phoenicians. But what's interesting is one of the 11 books of the Colburn Bible is called The Sons of Fire, which I believe is the last remaining Phoenician folklore. Now, the reason why, and there was a fellow by the name of Glenn Kimball who did a tremendous amount of research on this. And you're tracking it because the Colburn Bible has gone through different iterations and translations. And it started out in Egyptian cuneiform, and then it was translated into Phoenician. And while the Phoenicians disappeared, a lot of people don't realize is that the English alphabet is based on the Phoenician alphabet, which was 22 characters. And so the Phoenicians then translated a good portion of it, took it up to Great Britain, and the Celts really loved it. And also at the time, it was interesting, the Kolbrin was used for teaching not only the young Celts, but Romans as well were teaching their children from the Kolbrin. But at the time, it was called the Great Book, what was left of it. And then when the Glastonbury Abbey in England was razed, burned, a lot of it disappeared, but Celtic priests were able to keep what we have today, salvage what we have today, and they went into hiding with it and kept it in hiding until 3. And then there was a very small order of Celtic priests or monks, if you will, who were protecting it. Over the years, while this Scottish group was protecting it, it was translated into Old English and then into the Queen's English. And that was happening after World War I. It was translated into Queen's English from Old English being like Shakespeare. And during World War II, the entire manuscript came very close to destruction. It was in London. But interestingly, it wasn't German bombs that could have destroyed it, but rather a fundamentalist housewife who felt it was heresy and she felt it was necessary to burn everything. So she was a book burner. Where have we seen that before? And they kept on to it and moved it back up to Scotland. And there in Scotland, it was released around 1993 because 3,600 years ago, the ancient Egyptians prophesied the fall of the Soviet Union. The specific prophecy was that we would be coming onto these times, the return of the destroyer. Planet X, NIBIRU, is called the destroyer in the Kolbrin Bible, not only by the Egyptians, but by the Hebrews as well. And they're saying this is one of the signs of its return. And specifically, they accurately predicted the fall of the Soviet Union. They said a large seafaring nation, the largest seafaring nation, will, like an apple rotten at the core, collapse suddenly. Well, a lot of people didn't realize was that when the Cold War ended, the Russians had the largest naval fleet in the world, not America. America concentrates more on aircraft carriers with support ships, and nuclear missiles, whereas the Russians had a lot more missile cruisers, a lot more surface fleet. They had a different strategy, but their fleet was, by some measures, a third bigger than ours. And when they failed catastrophically. And then they also predicted the rise of radical Islam. They said there would be a new faith in the world that would promise peace and bring war to the four corners of the globe. And when this small Scottish order saw this, then they understood that the signs had come to pass and that it was time for them to bring the book out into the public. And that's when the Kolbrin was released. I obtained a copy of it through a publisher in India, and that's the edition we have. There are other editions. The difference with the Kolbrin Bible that I sell is that we did update it with the Chicago style book, for punctuation. We didn't change any of the language, but we did change some of the punctuation and sentence structure because just for readability issues. And then I added a citation system to it, so it's very easy for us to talk about it. And citation, and it's somewhat similar to what you have with the Bible, same kind of citation system. And it just allows for people to use the same text and to focus in on specific passages very easily because each one is numbered. And the Colburn really has some very, very strong things that it tells us. And there's, I will read for you how the Bible, the Colburn Bible, predicts an end of life as we know it. And this is from the Book of Manuscripts, starting with 3:4. When blood drops upon the earth, the destroyer will appear, and mountains will open up and belch forth fire and ashes. Trees will be destroyed, and all living things engulfed. Waters will be swallowed up by the land, and seas shall boil. Manuscript 3:5. The heavens will burn brightly and redly. There will be a copper hue over the face of the land, followed by a day of darkness. A new moon will appear and break up and fall. Then the people will scatter in madness. They will hear the trumpet and battle cry of the destroyer and will seek refuge within dens in the earth. Terror will eat away their hearts, and their courage will flow from them like water from a broken pitcher. They will be eaten up in the flame of wrath and consumed by the breath of the destroyer. And then I jump to manuscripts 3:10, because this is of all of the passages in the Colburn, this is my most favorite, and I just really love it. Manuscripts 3:10, in those days, men will have the great book before them. Wisdom will be revealed. The few will be gathered for the stand. It is the hour of trial. The dauntless ones will survive. The stout-hearted will not go down to destruction. And there are some things here that as I read it, your viewers may be going, that's familiar with other things, particularly with the Bible. And I treat the Bible even-handedly with other texts and just classify it as a wisdom text. So, and it's allegorical, and I take it that way. That gives me even footing for the analysis. Now, that's what Greg Jenner does in his book that you were holding up, and he does an excellent job of comparing the Colburn to the Bible. But there was one thing in there that I thought was pretty interesting, is that people will scatter in madness. They will hear the trumpet and the battle cry of the destroyer. Now, think about the headlines we're seeing about earth trumpets around the world today. Like in Canada, especially, there's a lot of reports of earth trumpets, but we're finding earth trumpeting being reported all around the world, and they're calling it strange sounds or whatever. And debunkers come up with the most insane explanations, such as it's snow plow scraping across the pavement. But a lot of the things that we see in the Colburn Bible that are prophesized and explained are happening, and just as they did in the ancient days. That's the important thing to keep in mind. What the Colburn is telling us, what Greg Jenner believes the Colburn's telling us, is that The sinking of Atlantis was related to one of the flybys. Yeah. And it's very clearly documented of the deluge account, Noah's flood. And also there's the Egyptian version of Exodus, which I find most interesting. Now, the deluge account in the Colburn Bible is the story of Sesudah and Hanok. And when you read it, there's a tremendous amount of similarity between the Hebrew account and what is in the Egyptian account. And I think this is really part and parcel of Moses was an Egyptian prince. He had all of this knowledge. And I think a lot of this was already known to the leadership in Egypt with things that he would inevitably put into the 5 books. That is the modern Tanakh or the Torah, which is a smaller part of the Christian Old Testament. And I think a lot of the things that we read, and I only just read just a couple of very light passages, but there are other passages that describe in very brutal detail what will happen. And men are going to become impotent, and women are going to become infertile. Fear, just plain fear. That's where it's really coming. And this is what's difficult for me, is that people always ask, when am I going to see it with my own eyes? When am I going to see it with my own eyes? Well, it doesn't matter when you see it, because you're not going to believe you're intelligent enough to actually understand what it means. You're going to go turn on a television and let some talking head explain it to you. And that's what 90% of the people are going to do. And that's when they're going to be lied to. Huge lies. And by the time they realize it, then there's going to be a panic. And so all of the fear and the terror that is described in the many different passages of the Colburn Bible is just going to repeat itself again. So other people are going, when am I going to see it with my own eyes? Which the right question is when am I going to believe that it's a clear and present danger? That's the right question, not when am I going to see it. But for me, it's really not even a matter of when am I going to see it. Personally, I never want to see it because I know what it means. But will I see it? Yes, I eventually will. And when I do, what I'm going to see is fear, horror, and panic. And that's what I live in anticipation of, that we will see these days of horror. And it goes all the way back to what happens, the descriptions in the Colburn Bible, and there are many passages in the Colburn Bible. Nice thing about Greg Jenner's book is he focuses on those. He takes snippets. He doesn't use a full passage, but he will use parts of that passage that he wants to talk about, and it's really, really relevant. But also, if you read through the book, you'll see that there's the citation system. So if you want to go read the full passage, you have the citation. You go do that. But still the same, Greg really compares not only does he compare this with the Bible, but also other wisdom texts, folklore. He does a very, very good job. It's just one of those popular little books that's always been a great one. And people just like it because it's a fast read, and it really is going to tell you, is this your cup of tea or not?
Hmm. And he, or not he, but it's from the Colbert Bible. You talked about the trumpeting, and before that, like when people saw the destroyer, how they got silent and their faces got pale, and then the trumpeting, and then there's about dust and smoke clouds that darken. It's 6:11 that uh, also that the
Oh, you mean the manuscript's 310? The
I'm
few gathered for the stand. It is the hour of trial.
6:11. It's dust and smoke clouds darkened the
Ah,
sky and colored the water up, upon which they fell with a bloody hue,
mm-hmm.
and so that the waters got polluted by this dust, and also they are talking about like hot showers with fire, flowing fire and cinders.
Right. We're going to have this coming flyby is probably going to be the worst of the flybys.
Hmm.
Um, my personal opinion from my research over the years is that this will actually be the last survivable flyby. You know, Nostradamus predicts the end of Earth. Earth will be scorched by the sun, I think the year 3800. And what I think Nostradamus was talking about parallels with celestial mechanics here, because when you have something that's in a long orbit, like the Nemesis system, um, it's inherently unstable. And because this is in a comet like orbit, and you're going to have what's called the Kozai mechanism coming into play. That was something that was theoretically created by a Japanese astronomer, Yoshida Kozai. And it describes what happens when you have two objects, one in orbit around the other, that has a very unstable, highly ecliptical, uh, very elongated looking orbit. And that being with the Kozai mechanism, the smaller object, which is orbiting the larger object, will eventually do one of two things. It'll be flung out into deep space, or it will crash into the other object. I think what will happen is in years hence that one of the planets in the Nemesis system, the Planet X system, will collide with the sun. That will unleash a solar storm event of just simply unimaginable magnitude. And that would be certainly enough that it would just, you get hit with something like that, it's going to fry the planet. Interestingly enough, there was a movie with Nicolas Cage called Knowing, and it shows an example exactly of that, where it would be an end of life event where there's a solar storm that occurs and literally it just burns off all of the surface life on the planet. Just terrible. And that could very well happen. So that's for future ancestors. For us, the more immediate thing is that we have what we have going on right now is there's a tremendous amount of suppression. Uh, the elites have pretty much taken me out of the search engines. If you type Planet X or Nibiru, it'll take a while for you to find me, and if you do, it's just one or two references. Even though every month I'm putting out fresh content, and This all started about a year ago. The other thing that they're doing is there's a lot of fear porn on YouTube right now. There are a lot of videos about Planet X that are just gibberish, nonsense. They're getting, and what's really annoying for me is a lot of times some of these they'll just take some of my work without attribution and use it in their production like it was theirs in the first place. If I complain about it, YouTube ignores it. And so there's nothing I can do to stop that. What I see them doing is that they're suppressing the voices of people that are trying to do honest research on this. And they're going for people that are just looking to cash in. They want the AdSense revenue. All right. And so they're driving traffic at their videos, but there's also another meaning to it. And that is that when things really start to get crazy, you're going to have a lot of folks that are going to go on the internet to look for information. And when they go to look, what are they going to find? Fear porn, garbage. That's what they're going to mostly find. So they're going to go, well, the internet's just not a good place to look for information on this because there are a bunch of idiots racing around going, look, there's a smudge on a cloud. That's Planet X, you know. Hey, maybe sometimes a smudge is just a smudge. And that's what they're really doing. They want to keep people in the dark. They want to keep them confused because they want to ensure that the greatest number of people are going to die. You know, the vast majority of humanity lives within 100 miles of a coastline. And that means they're already marked for death. A lot of these people are just going to, the tsunamis are going to come in when the pole shift happens, but impact events, they're not going to do very well, and not at all. The result will be that probably 3 or 4 years into the tribulation, global population will be reduced down to maybe 5%. And for those at that point who have survived, the elites will come up from underground. They're in bunkers 2 miles underground. They got caverns and bunkers and all kinds of niches that are filled with supplies, seeds, canned food, medicines, this type of thing, construction materials, everything necessary to rebuild, if you will. And they'll emerge from underground with all of this, and then they're going to say to people, look, take the chip, all right, and accept our leadership, and we'll share all of this with you. And people who are desperate will go, well, it's a bad deal, but a bad deal is better than no deal, and they'll take it. The problem is they're going to take it thinking they can, you know, there's this old storyline of people making deals with the devil and then finding a way to cheat the devil. No, when they take that deal, there's no cheating the devil. The devil will have them hook, line, and sinker. That's it. They're done. And we wind up as a slave species for countless generations to come. And we'll be given our freedom to die with the planet when the planet dies. On the other hand, when the elites come up from underground, you know, see, that's the thing people don't understand about Planet X. Planet X to me is like the big Control Alt Delete in the sky. You know how when you have your computer, you Control Alt Delete, you reboot it, you know, something locks up, something goes wrong. It's a reset. It's a reset because when Planet X comes in, it's going to completely just destroy the control mechanisms the elites have over us right now. Things just going to stop working. And it'll be a very bizarre kind of circumstance, because on one hand, we're going to be dying in vast numbers, millions at a time. But on the other hand, we're going to be dying as free men and women. All right. So the question will be is how many survivors are going to come out of this, and they're going to understand the value of their freedom, so that when the elites are offering them all of these trinkets, these inducements to return to slavery, to say, yeah, put the shackles back on me. All right. There's going to be a lot of people who do. But what it really comes down to is there going to be a critical mass of survivors that are going to say no? Depending on who you talk to about the American Revolution, it was about 30%, some say as little as 5% of the colonists actually fought and participated in the American Revolution, and that the vast majority of colonists either did nothing or they aligned themselves and worked with the British. So you don't need a majority to prevail. What you need are enough people to create the nucleus of critical mass. And once you have critical mass, then things just will take off on their own, and that's how it will work. So the question is will there be enough survivors who are going to say no to the elites, understanding there's punishment for that, because they're not saying no to the carrot, they're saying no to the stick. And if enough of them say no to the carrot, we'd rather stay free, there'll be a time of punishment. But if there's enough of them that do that, eventually humanity prevails, the greater part of humanity that's left, and the elites lose their power, they lose their control, and they go, that's it, they wind up on the shelf with the dinosaurs. So those are our two outcomes. One is the future after, which is not very good. Or we stand up and we say, hey, we're not going to throw away our freedom. It's the classic, your birthright for a bowl of lentils kind of a situation. And if we do that, then we're going to have a Star Trek future. We're going to, as a species, we're going to evolve. And that evolution is not going to be physical. That evolution is going to be spiritual, emotional, intellectual. And how will we know that we've made that evolutionary step? Will be pretty simple. It's where you have the vast majority of humanity that says we are no longer going to make acquisition the main motivation of our life, but rather the main motivation of our life will be harmony. Harmony within ourselves and everything that's around us. And when harmony replaces acquisition, then we know we've successfully navigated the evolution. And after that, it could become a very beautiful time for humanity. We go to the stars. We're welcomed by other races as friends. There's a lot of good stuff there. But the question will be is, are there going to be enough survivors after several years of really going through tough times? Are they going to make that final sacrifice and take the punches for saying no to the elites, and they're not taking any of the trinkets?
Mm-hmm. Marshall, I would like to ask you also at least some of the 10 questions. It was a book that I was preparing, but it has never happened that I haven't produced it. But do you want to say anything else from the Kolbrin Bible or the Greg Jenner book before?
I would say that for those of you that want to read the Kolbrin, you're going to anyone who tells me that they've read the Colburn Bible over the weekend, don't stand in front of them, because if they get a Pinocchio nose, it'll go right through you. It's a very dense book. The word in English is laconic, where you're using very few words to express very big ideas. And you're going to find that the Colburn, as particularly with the Egyptian accounts, is a pleasure to read, because the Egyptians are very businesslike and straightforward. There's not all of this, the hoochie coochie princess went and shot the arrow in the sky and the bad bird fell, and all of this allegorical metaphor and all this, woo-woo stuff. No, it reads like a man on the street interview. And it'll take a long time to read through it. Now, myself, when I was reading through the Colburn, I could only do about a couple of pages a day. And then you stop, and then all of a sudden you just start thinking. It really provokes a lot of thoughts. It's a really fun book that's to get you thinking. And it's interesting also to see the cultural differences in how the Egyptians and the Celts viewed family relationships. And where the Egyptians tended to be more authoritarian, the Celts actually, to me, were more ahead of it. There was a man's status in his clan was really largely determined not by who he could kill, but it was really determined to a good extent by how his own family held him in regard. And I thought that showed a tremendous amount of wisdom. So for folks that are going to have the Colburn during the tribulation, you're going to have to make new rules for your communities. And the Colburn is a wonderful source of rules, very ancient, very proven. And the nice thing about it is that you're not going to get into all kinds of arguments because it's so old, it's neutral. It's not like they're saying, we're going to have this book, modern book. And then everybody goes, no, we don't want that book. We want this modern book. And it's all polarized. Everything is, no, you're not going to have that with the Colburn. It's just going to be a lot of great ideas. And I think that's what's useful for it. So for your viewers out there, if you're going to start off, if you're just interested in knowing about the destroyer, Planet X Nibiru, read Greg Jenner's book. If you want to get more into the ancient wisdom of the Egyptians and the Celts, just go, get the Colburn. Everybody that gets it loves it. They enjoy reading it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have it too. And now the 10 questions, you maybe have them on the screen also, and I put it in the text.
Okay.
Text, description text then. So, but it was a book that I was preparing, and I would have asked 15 people who know about Nibiru Flyby, and you are one of them. And so I will read the questions, and the first question you actually already have answered in the first part, the first video we have done, but I can read it anyway.
Sure.
When did you learn about NIBIRU-Planet X system Flyby? Can you name some persons who made you believe that the Nibiru Flyby will occur? Could you recommend work of some other researchers on this subject?
Okay. Let me go to, I'm going to find the article actually on my, And here we go. I'm going to share my screen again and just show your viewers, just answer from my website. So this way you could actually go to my website and you could read these articles that I'm going to talk about now and follow up on, so that you can get more depth into it. And here we go. Now, the very first article I wrote on Planet X was January of 2002, which was, Did Planet X Nibiru Kill the Dinosaurs? And I was using information that I had developed for a PAX TV interview, and Brian Marsden of the Smithsonian Astrophysics Lab, astronomer, he helped me with this, and we were looking at this as an alternate theory for the Luis Alvarez Chicxulub impact theory of 65 million years ago. And then I think the one that you're going to, is like, where did I really get to the point of there we go, Ulysses. Now, when did I really feel that there was smoking gun evidence? And because we were writing about it, we were documenting it, I had written a book about it, but we were looking for that smoking gun evidence, if you will. Bang. And we were tracking a probe that ESA and NASA had put up called Ulysses, which was in a circumpolar orbit around the sun. And here was let me activate. Let me go down here and
You had there Bob Fletcher also, I saw. He speaks also about Nibiru Flyby.
Well, what do you know? The video was pulled.
Oh.
Right. Well, what happened was Ulysses was this was one of my other old articles. I'll stop the share. Well, this is happening all the time. Things disappear, removed. A lot of evidence is being destroyed nowadays. But it was the Ulysses probe, and what the Ulysses probe showed us was that we have from the sun, the southern hemisphere of the sun is interacting. We knew the object would be coming up from the southern skies. So what we were saying is, if it's coming up from the southern skies, then the sun is going to be interacting with it, which is exactly what we saw. That was the smoking gun proof we saw from the Ulysses probe. And that's when, for me, it was smoking gun. But 2008 was a real smoking gun year, period, because there was the South Pole telescope, and we had a couple of folks that had imagery that leaked out of the South Pole telescope that was showing the Planet X system. So 2008 was the year where it really, for me, locked down. Up to that point, it was just continually building. The evidence for it was substantial. I think that if there's other folks that you want to follow, I always recommend Zecharia Sitchin. And he's the author of The 12th Planet. If you're going to read just one book from Zecharia Sitchin, don't have it here, that would be The Lost Book of Enki, which is an autobiography of Lord Enki of the Anunnaki. These are the folks that came from planet Nibiru, which is in orbit around Nemesis, the smaller sun, companion to our sun. And they came here for gold. They need gold to repair their atmosphere. We're using aluminum for atmosphere modification today. And we're putting huge amounts of aluminum up in the sky. The big reason why we're doing all of this, and they've set it up, the elites have set it up that if you use the word chemtrail, which is pretty well recognized, then you're automatically disqualified as a kooky conspiracy theorist. So you have to use their verbiage, which is geoengineering or climate change or whatever they want to call it. It's a little more nebulous term. But the reason why we're spraying is that the elites want to get as much aluminum up in the sky as possible. They understand they're causing a biosphere implosion. They understand life is being destroyed by this. But we're sitting here, and it's like, imagine a golf game. We're playing the front nine. They're playing the back nine. All right? And here we're just going, why? This doesn't make sense. Why are you destroying our biosphere? Why are we losing 200 to 300 species a day, plant and animal species? Why is it that half of the wild animals in the world are dead, gone? Why is it that half of the coral in the world is dead and bleached? You lose, and coral is important because corals are literally the nurseries of the sea, and marine life constitutes a third of the protein in the diet of most third world countries. So if they can't go out and fish anymore and find enough fish, they're going to have to go to some other protein source. That's going to cause problems. So why is it that the elites are destroying everything? Is because they just want to reflect photons back out into space. The sun is brighter because it is reacting to the to Nemesis, which is coming in. So the increase in luminance, which is very easily measured, and you can look at it, you can see it's really skyrocketing. It's carrying radiation. The radiation that's coming in on this light is not only coming into the Earth, but it's able to, because we're having a global warming effect, more of it is being, we don't have so much as it used to be with ice reflecting it back into space. So we're retaining more of it. That radiation is going to the core of the planet, and the core of the planet is heating up. And this is actually what Edgar Cayce said would be happening, that it was, we would have a pole shift that was a result of the core of the planet heating up. We would have a lot of disasters. And they're just trying to reflect all this radiation out into space because they're looking at a time when, after the worst of the tribulation, they're going to come up to ground. They don't want to come up to ground and find that Earth has become another Mars or another Venus. And so they're hedging on that. And so by reflecting radiation today, that means there's less of it building up in the core of the planet, which means the planet will, when we come through this, the oceans may be dead, but our atmosphere, land, this will still be intact and capable of regenerating itself naturally. So that's the reason why they're doing the spraying and all of these things. It's just not one bada bing that you realize all of this is happening, Alexandra. It's dominoes that are falling, and then you just follow the dominoes as they fall, and then everything tends to make a lot of sense.
You mentioned other researchers or other whistleblowers last time. You talked about Bob Dean in the year 2008.
Bob Dean, good guy, and you can find videos that he's done. He was on with Karen Cassidy of Project Camelot. Karen runs a good site. Also, interestingly enough, with Planet X, you have, oh gosh, he's the remote viewing instructor, Ed Dames. And now Ed is forecasting that right now we should be seeing Planet X in the sky about the size of the moon. Well, actually, there are some reports that are coming in. We're publishing videos where people are getting sightings. There was, over a month ago, a storm called Ophelia, and it went up into the British Isles, and they were seeing two suns in the sky all around the country. Now, at the time, BBC was saying it was the result of desert sands picked up after the storm formed in the Azores. Well, that was a blatant lie. Ophelia did not form off of the Azores. It was an oddball. It formed in the mid-Atlantic from a cold front. So where it would have picked up all the particulates is when it swept through Spain and Portugal, fanning the fires, which is probably the reason why you had what happened. That was masking the sky, and people could see things. But, I mean, I have a gentleman who's a radio host, and he called me yesterday, and he was really disturbed because there he is in Phoenix. He's driving down the road, and he sees two suns in the sky. He pulled over, and his smartphone was in for repairs, so he didn't have anything. But he just pulled off the side of the road, just stood there for several minutes watching it and realizing he was seeing it. So, we're getting to the point where more and more people are going to be seeing it.
Yeah, and you talked about Mr. Harrington, the astronomer who was probably.
Yeah, Harrington was Robert H. Harrington. Actually, quite a few people in the field believe he was assassinated for his work on Planet X. Robert H. Harrington was he was a chief naval astronomer for the U.S. Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C. And he wrote a brilliant paper on Planet X, a white paper. And then he had a telescope specially constructed with a special type of lens. And he had that shipped to a United States observatory in New Zealand. And there they did a sky survey. All of the films were returned. NASA took possession of the films and buried them. Nobody's ever seen what they were imaging. Then Harrington appeared in a video with Zachariah Sitchin, which I believe is called Are We Alone? And in that, he was talking about uh, Planet X and the possibility that it could support life. And that is, I think, where he stepped on it. And what he did was he agreed with Sitchin. This is in a long elliptical orbit, and it's clockwise orbit, not counterclockwise like we are. And that it's steeply inclined to the ecliptic, which is the plane of our solar system. Just imagine the equator of the sun and just stretch it out in a concentric ring to the 12 constellations of the zodiac. And that's the ecliptic. And so it's the Nibiru is coming up steep inclined to the ecliptic. And he then, not long after all of that, he died. He was a relatively young man in his prime, very healthy. He died of a very rapid onset cancer that has been known to be used in targeted assassinations by intelligence agencies. And that was it. He was silenced, and his work on Planet X was smeared, and that was pretty unfortunate. Now, there's other heroes for me. Carlos Muñoz Ferrada, Chilean astronomer. He's actually the first one that talked about what we call Planet X. He used the term Hercolibus, and Hercolibus is the ancient Atlantean term for Planet X. It has many names: Destroyer, Wormwood, Hercolibus, Red Planet, Red Dragon, so forth. And I think that, to me, Ferrada was just really way ahead of his time, brilliant astronomer. He was the one that defined this as a system, or what we call a mini constellation. And he was calling it a black star and a planet, Hercolibus. That's what he was predicting. In the same kind of orbit that Harrington and Zecharia Sitchin were talking about, long elliptical orbit that was clockwise. And when he announced in 1940 the existence of it, it was just, I don't think there was much notice given, but he nonetheless announced it. Now, black stars, what he called black star, is now today what we call a brown dwarf. And that's the formal title that's used. It's called a black star back then because they're very difficult. It's a star that's very difficult to see because it is shrouded with iron oxide dust from when it detonated and ignited. And this is something that you can see in the Colburn Bible. You can see it in, the Holy Bible, where you have the waters turning red, you have the iron oxide dust falling. That's exactly what will happen. We will pass through this. It'll be a dense field of it, and it will pollute all the surface waters. So for that reason, people really need to be focused on finding underground water sources, drilling multiple wells on their properties, that type of thing, so that they have plenty of water.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And shall I take the second question? Some say that the Nibiru flyby will occur in the end of 2017. What do you think and why?
No. This will be the flyby really is not going to occur until Nemesis, our sun's smaller twin star, or the brown dwarf. When it reaches its point of perihelion, its closest point to the sun, that is when the flyby will begin. And at that point, it's going to take several years for the flyby to go on. It just doesn't zip in out of nowhere like a shooting star. You've got massive bodies moving through space, and they're not going to move at the speed of human expectation. So, 2017, I don't know, basically giving people dates as to saying it's going to happen on this date or that date. It's the fastest way to make people sit on their butt and do nothing. They go, mark a date on a calendar, and then I'll know I can go shopping and max out all my credit cards, and while everybody else is still, a week or two away from getting the big news. Ha ha, brilliant me. And that's all I have to do. So, I mean, giving people dates is a waste of time. It's Amtrak, the train system here in America. It's like Amtrak. You don't know when the train is going to arrive. You know that it just eventually will.
Yeah. And the third question is, could you describe what you expect will happen during the Nibiru flyby, such as earthquakes, flooding, several days of darkness? Do you believe the electric power grid, internet, and mobile phone net will be working?
Well, it's all of the above. An easy way to think of it is go read your Bible, look at the story of Noah and the flood and Exodus, and take all of that and put it in one event. That's what we have coming.
But what about the power grid, internet, mobile phone?
Grids are going down, phones are going down. Right now I'm working on my next book, Radio Free Earth, and what I'm trying to do is help people to understand how to use consumer two-way radios and amateur two-way radios so they can stay in contact with each other and their communities and keep contacts with others. But life as we know it is going to end, and we are going to go back into an agrarian economy. So forget Bitcoin, that's gone. And politics will be local. As large governments fail, you're going to have local governments that are going to become more powerful. Power is going to vest into them, and that's how I see that playing out.
And you talked about the strong winds and
hypervelocity winds, worst imaginable environment. That's it. Just imagine worst environment. If you don't have a shelter underground, and in my book, Surviving the Planet X Tribulation, hold that up because that's important. I give a lot of information about the kind of issues around building shelters, about shielding from radiation. Solar radiation is going to be the big threat, all right, in terms of natural disasters. Now, that being said, what are the three leading causes of death during the tribulation? Number one is going to be denial. Number two is going to be procrastination. And number three is going to be location. Those are going to be the three biggest causes of death. So, denial, as in, it's all nonsense. I don't want to hear about it. Nothing's going to happen. Okay. A lot of that, a lot of people, boy, especially ones in awareness, they have spouses that are threatening them with divorce if they don't stop talking about it. Then you have procrastination. And unfortunately, a lot of people in awareness are in procrastination because they're married to a spoiler spouse, or their friends and family are ridiculing them, and so they're really not doing anything super constructive. And they just, they go on YouTube and they watch fear porn videos all day, trying to see if they can extract some intelligence out of that. And that's procrastination. All it's doing is setting them up to fail. Because in the final analysis, location. The vast majority of humanity lives along coastlines. Coastlines are all going to be wiped out. All right. I mean, it's a pretty simple concept, but when you explain it to people, they don't want 30 words. They want 3 million words so they can find all kinds of equivocation and parachute clauses and whatever so they can rationalize their way out of it. No, you live along the coastline, you die. You live on a fault line, you die. All right? You know, you don't need rocket science, but a lot of people do because that's procrastination.
Yeah. Or you have to relocate. You have
Huh?
you have to find another location.
Yeah,
Move
that's it.
Yeah,
That's the hard part for people is relocating.
Yeah.
I call it busting a move because you're going to wind up busting up your family to do it. So, I mean, it's terrible. There are a lot of people in awareness that they have to decide, well, my relatives, my loved ones, my children, my spouse, they're all in denial. They all think I'm crazy. They think I'm stupid. I know what's coming. So do I leave them and survive and try and be in service to other people and help out? Or do I stay here with them and I help them to die as well as, help them to die as well as possible? Yeah. So, I mean, if that's it, if all your awareness comes down to is telling your children, go to the light, go to the light, go to the light, and that's it, okay, that's pretty sad.
Yeah. By the way, the book you are talking about that you are working with, when do you think it will be that you are finish it for production?
January.
January, yeah, okay, so it's almost finished.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And
Number four, what are your thoughts about the level of radiation and safety of nuclear power plants, about fires, explosions of gas and oil tanks, forests, wooden houses, about toxicity in the soil, free waters during and after the Nibiru flyby? What do you think about potential damage of the human brain, spinal cord by the strong electromagnetic field caused by Nibiru? Would it be good to advise people to wait with pregnancy till next year or after the Nibiru flyby?
well, anything on the surface is subject to destruction. The tribulation is not going to be uniform in how it affects the planet. There'll be some parts of the planet that nothing happens. Other parts that'll be totally devastated. So it's literally going to be the luck of where you are. If you're on the surface, it's going to be a problem. Nuclear and fracking are going to be very, very bad. We're going to have Fukushima type events happening around the world because these nations there's ways to build nuclear reactors that are very safe. But a reactor that is very safe is not a reactor you can use to make fissile weapon fuel. And so everybody goes with these type of reactors that they can make fissile weapon fuel from, which are tea kettles. You can scram the reactors, drop the cores, but if you don't have the ability to continually pump fresh, cool water in while that core is cooling down over a period of 2 years, you're going to have a Fukushima event where the core melts down into the ground and starts polluting. So we're going to have a lot of Fukushimas. There's going to be a tremendous amount of terrible radiation. Fracking is going to be another disaster. Fracking wells have just a witch's brew of chemicals in them. And you have, let's say in America, the New Madrid fault line erupts, it'll send a shockwave, horizontal shockwave, that will be felt throughout the country. And you're going to have these fracking well, the concrete casings are going to fail. And when those casings fail, then all of the chemicals that they use are going to start leaching up into the surface. That's the reason why in fracking areas you see dead soil, brown grass, water that catches fire. And so there are going to be entire vast tracts of land that are going to be uninhabitable as a result of this, which is really a shame because they've been fracking in areas that would be excellent survival areas, like the middle of the state of Pennsylvania, for example, and which has now just been horribly fracked. So nuclear fracking, you're also going to have manufacturing disasters. I mean, we're going to have a lot of pollution. It's going to be really, really awful, and it's going to cause a lot of problems. In terms of procreation, I mean, right now, one of the really alarming things is that sperm motility is way down. And so men are becoming less capable of naturally, couples are less having to use like in vitro and other different extraordinary measures rather than just naturally conceiving children through copulation. And that's already happening. So we're going to have more and more of that. You have, we look at, for example, autism rates in children are just skyrocketing. And by current projection, half of all children born in the United States will be autistic by 2030. I mean, half. Think about that. Half the population is autistic. So there's already, I mean, the elites are doing a lot of different things right now to set us up to fail. They want to reduce the population of the planet. They want to get it down. There's something called the Georgia Guidestones. And the Georgia Guidestones is, some people call it 10 Commandments for the 21st century. It's 10 precepts. It's written in 8 different languages. It was erected, the monument was erected the same year CNN went on the air, back in the 80s. And the first precept is keep the population of humanity under 500 million and in harmony with the world environment. Well, think about this. Doesn't say how do we get down to 500 million, but if it's saying that you want to have a maximum of 500 million, then that would necessarily presume that the population is weaned down to even less than that. Maybe 250 million people survive. And then they're going to naturally start procreating. And that is going to be, that is going to create a whole different world of social mores and structures. And again, we have a big choice. We're either going to take it and keep doing the way we're going, and at which point we're just slaves again for the elites, or we go off in another direction and we have a Star Trek future, and literally, a few centuries from now, humanity could be in the tens of billions, but scattered through planets all around the galaxy. All right. So we're going to go through a really terrible and tough time of procreation. Population reduction. We're being set up to fail, and people don't see it. They're not interested. As long as they have their smartphones, that's all they need.
Mm.
Next question.
Yeah, I would just ask this for question number 4. Normally, I live in Sweden, and in Sweden there are houses that look like stone houses, but actually it's wooden. It's of wood, and I imagine that when the Nibiru flyby occurs, that it will be a lot of stones, like a lot of.
Anything on the surface is subject to destruction by fires, wind, floods. You're going to have an underground shelter if you're going to get through this. You're not going to survive above ground.
Yeah.
You're not.
Okay, you have answered the number 5. I will read it, but you have talked about it already. How are you preparing for the Nibiru flyby? Are you planning to move to a safer location? Do you have considered to buy a free energy device? Could you give some advice to others?
Well, actually, after I finish Radio Free Earth, I have one last book on Planet X I'm going to write, which is Win-Win Dome Communities. And this is really a business-like approach to survival. So that's where my interest is really going right now. Is there will be a time when people are looking up in the sky, and most of the people are going to go, let's go see what they say on CNN. And then they're going to get lied to. And they're going to be okay with that because it's exactly the lie that they're going to want to hear. Don't worry, move along, just an interesting light show. But then there are going to be people who trust their instincts. They're going to look up at the sky and they're going to go, I see a clear and present danger. Now, that could be the leader of a church, but also it could be a millennial who's an investor. And so with this last book, I'm really talking to people who are going to take a business-like approach to starting a community, which is probably more attractive to me because it would be more viable, could serve more people more effectively. Take a business-like approach to it. So that's where I'd like to go with it. Other than that, you know, I live day to day. You get up in the morning, the day starts, you just start doing your thing. I may have short-term plans over a period of a year, 2 years, but for the rest of it, I don't get real heavily into it. If I had the money to go out and build bullets, beans, and bunkers, and I wouldn't tell you. What, I would sit here and announce on YouTube, here's where my survival community is. Come and steal it. No, that's the first rule of survival. Don't tell anybody where you're at. All right. But here where I'm presently located, it's good for me as an individual, and I'm happy with it as an individual. If I'm part of a community, then probably there would be another relocation.
Okay. And a free energy device, is it something?
I would love to see free energy devices. I mean, you can already, there's a kind of free energy device that goes back to the early days of the telegraph system called earth batteries. And you can actually set up 2 dissimilar metals as electrodes in the ground with a north-south orientation. And you can pull energy just from the current that's moving through the planet. So free energy is already available if you want to use an earth battery. But I think that we're going to see a lot of free energy devices that are going to be invented by survivors. And the advantage is going to be there will be no mechanisms to suppress that. I've seen some really phenomenal 0-point energy devices, and these companies are just pulverized and beat into the ground and disappear because energy is hugely profitable. Selling us power from fossil fuels makes people incredibly wealthy. If you can just get energy for free, excuse me, yeah, there's a lot of very, very wealthy elite people that are not going to like that because they're going to lose their big paydays. So, but on the other hand, once the controls over our ability to do these things disappears, because right now what they do is the elites they're sitting in front of the patent office, and when somebody comes in with a patent and they have a working model for their patent application, they go after them. They'll go out and have a government goon squad go out, arrest the guy, steal everything he has, destroy his life, wreck everything, so that he's not capable of doing anything anymore. They do this all the time now. So when they no longer have the ability to do this, then we're going to see Nikola Teslas popping up all over the place, and then people will share the knowledge.
Yeah.
And so I see a technological renaissance coming. Not that we're going to go into some Orwellian Mad Max dark era, but people are going to be using technology to solve everyday problems, and they're going to be sharing it. And their compensation will be recognition for the work that they've done. And if somebody says, well, that is really stupid idea, nobody's going to do it, I would say to you that never use a computer or go on the internet ever again, because there's a guy called Linus Torvalds who did Linux, and he gave it for free to the world. You go on Amazon, it's using Linux servers. You go on Google, they're using Linux servers. The vast majority of websites are now served on Linux. This is an example of somebody who did a profound technology and just gave it to the world. And so it works. We have a working model. We wouldn't have an internet without a guy who just said, hey, this is the kind of knowledge that shouldn't be proprietary. Everybody should have free access to it. And he's really made a difference. We'll see more Nikola Teslas, Linus Torvalds. We're going to see more of these people because there's not going to be the suppression mechanism that pushes them down and destroys them. And they're going to be able to freely create and freely share their ideas, which is a big reason for why I'm doing Radio Free Earth, this I'm bringing out, because that is the mechanism. When somebody does invent a really good free energy device, then you want to get on the radios and just tell the world, get it out there. And that's what Radio Free Earth is all about.
Yeah. Shall I say, say number 6, the 6th question? Many people count on that they will receive a salary pension each month, and their savings are safe in their bank accounts. What do you think will happen with salaries, pensions, savings during and after the NIBIRU flyby? Do you believe it's important that all people gain access to all their saved money, including pensions, as soon as possible, and have more of a free choice where they want to stay during the NIBIRU flyby? Example, a person who lives in France on a pension from Denmark survives NIBIRU flyby in France. Who will send him his pension from Denmark if the NIBIRU flyby will be successfully covered up for taxpayers in Denmark, even during the rest of 2017 and the rest before NIBIRU-Flyby. Sea pole shift, the highest natural point in Denmark is 170 meters above sea level. Denmark will be devastated by a 100-foot tsunami that will roll over this flat country. So what do you think about...
Let's just look at this from a simple perspective. If 95% of the people perish on the face of the earth, who's going to be left to write the checks? Okay? I mean, if you survive this, surviving it with your retirement pension, that's wishful thinking. You'll be lucky just to survive. You know what your retirement pension is going to be? It's going to be your family. You know, look what's happened to families. I mean, as parents, oh, get rid of them. Put them in nursing homes. Kids, oh, no, I got to go to work. Put them in a daycare. We shove our families into containers so that those of us that are in productive years of our lives can be very productive for people who are enslaving the world. All right. During the tribulation, families are going to come. We're going to go back to old ways. And you're going to have a whole family under one roof. Kids, mom, dad, grandparents. Everyone's going to take care of everybody. Everyone's going to pull their weight. All right. That's going to be your retirement.
Yeah. But if we knew, all of us knew about NIBIRU-Flyby, that it will come, and all of us could get our money now and move if you need to move to safer location. So maybe a lot of more people would survive.
Not really.
No?
Now people are going to procrastinate and delay right up to the very last minute. And then when they can see that there's nothing left to do, then they're going to complain and about how their government has let them down, that they're outraged taxpayers. There's going to be a lot of anger, a lot of fear. And then after there's enough death, all of the rage, all of the emoting, all of the nonsense, all of the machinations, that's just going to settle down. And whoever's left, these people are going to pretty much, they're either going to get busy living or get busy dying.
Mm.
You know, so it's like life as we know it is over. That's it. Including your pension, Alexandra.
I have realized that.
Yeah.
Another question, could you compare the challenges that citizens in different countries are facing during and after NIBIRU-Flyby, for example, in Australia, Japan, Denmark?
Well, you know, it depends on where you're at. Let's talk about your country and my country.
Okay.
In my country, my government is buying 1.8 million rounds of small arms ammunition, plastic coffins for up to 5 or 6 bodies, and building detention camps. That's how my government's dealing with it. Your government has the most elaborate underground structure, survival structure. Sweden has enough underground capacity for every natural born Swede. If I were going to say what's the best country to live in during the Planet X tribulation, no question about it, Sweden. Your government's done more to prepare for you. Your government's preparing for you to survive. My government's preparing for us to die. There's a big difference. And for everything else, it's in between. And it really just depends on, what happens. The overarching agenda is the reduction of the human species. That's all.
Mm.
Reduction of the human species. So between the two of us, you have a much better chance of surviving this than I do. Because your government is wanting you to survive. Swedish government is preparing in that direction. Other governments in Europe too, but Sweden is the best. And a lot of the funding for your underground system came actually through the United Nations. But in America, no, not good. That's the reason why if I had my druthers, if I was going to relocate, I'd want to relocate to Canada.
Mm. I view it very differently about Sweden, because since 2014, when I learned about NIBIRU, it's like almost every week or second week I am writing to Secret Service, police, prosecutor office, politicians, tell the people, and they are not telling the people, and the most of people are also live along the coastlines. Then if it happened in December, it's cold and dark in Sweden, and the most of houses, I would say, are of wooden stuff, like not stones. I see it it's very bad. Um,
Right.
okay, I haven't seen coffins, FEMA coffins, but I don't believe that the government are telling the people what they know, and it's why I have moved actually to Czech Republic. I was chased by Secret Service, British Secret Service, in the beginning of 2013. So I couldn't move back or go back to Sweden almost. So I am here in Czech Republic, and where I live is more than 300 meters above sea level, and it's far away from the ocean in the middle
Right.
of Europe. So it's much better than in Sweden. But
Right.
I don't believe that the Swedish government is so much better than yours. But of course, I know about FEMA coffins, FEMA concentration camp in your country. I don't know about them in Sweden. But
Right. Well, I mean, it's going to vary in different places, and um, you just have to decide, are you responsible for your own survival or not?
yeah.
That's what people have to decide, and then it's finding it. But relocate is terribly difficult. I mean, it cost me a marriage relocating off the coastline of California. Okay. But you do it or you're not going to do it. That's all. You're going to go to an area where you feel you can do it. And for me, survival is really about not so much even for myself. I mean, I have no children. So at this stage in my life, I mean, let's talk brutal reality. What happens if I'm one of the ones that perish in that 95%? Well, then that's what happens. It won't be because I gave up easy. If I die fighting. All right. But that's just, there are going to be those that make it and those that don't. And you can either be selfish about it or you can be in it for the species. To me, all of this boils down to one huge fundamental moment. And that is when the elites come up from underground with all of their trinkets and they're offers of inducements to go back into slavery, and that people understand what's really at stake, and enough of them say, no, I'm not going to do that. And if that happens, humanity wins. That's it. So for me, that's really the purpose for, to survive. Is not, if I'm just wanting to survive for the sake of survival, then I'm just ready to cling on to one more day of life, no matter what the expenses. That only lasts for so long, and eventually you just, what's the point? You lose all hope. You have no passion for the future. But if you are in service to others, and you're trying to help make it a better world, and you're trying to help others, and that's where you find your motivation to survive. That can lead you into really powerful ways. You're working with God. You're working with the spirit world. You're working with all the positive forces, as opposed to, I want to live and I don't care if you die. All right. That kind of, attitude is, those people, they're going to be on their own. Whatever fate is the fate that they make. But if you're going to come at this and say, how can I be in service to others? There's no guarantee of success, but it is a personal path that you choose. So for me, that's really what it is. It's just, I'm going to be in service to others. This is how I want to deal with it. If I follow along the way, I follow along the way. But I'm going to walk the path of service to others. I'm not going to, because if you really want to walk, if you want to walk away from the tribulation when it's all said and done, then there's only one way you're going to do that. You got to walk through it with God. You got to have a good relationship with God. And if you're a stingy bastard, that ain't going to work. All right? Being self-serving. People got to come together, and they will. When things are at their worst, we're at our best. And so right now, we're a bunch of our consumer society is based on nihilistic philosophy. And people define their lives in terms of not what they have, but they define their lives by what they don't have. They don't have the newest car, the biggest house, the best job, the most attractive spouse, whatever. So you go out and buy it. Or you buy something that'll get it for you. Or you go into debt and you buy it and you get it for you. But the whole point is that in our world, our consumer societies teach us to define ourselves by what we do not have, so that we know what we need to possess to acquire. That is the life of acquisition. Like we're for a bunch of Ferengi from Star Trek. And, I remember that was from that, the Ferengi was the 99 rules of acquisition or something. And it was like, it's okay to sell your mother into slavery as long as you get a good price. And that's Ferengi logic. So no, that's not for me.
Mm-hmm. I have heard that Japan, it would be better to move from Japan when the Nibiru flyby will occur. There is also a lot of nuclear power plants there. But
Japan's not going to be, you don't want to be there. You don't want to be in Japan. There's a lot of places you just don't want to be. But I mean, Japan is already the most seismically active nation in the globe. Okay? So you add Planet X coming, it's just going to be downright nasty. And it's like radiation. Well, they already have. Fukushima radiation is already making a lot of grief in Tokyo. Tokyo is slowly turning into a dead zone. But the government there is trying to make everybody feel comfortable with high levels of radiation that are causing all kinds of health issues. uh, because if the people abandon Tokyo and they move out to other places, the economic consequences for Japan are profound. So they'd much rather have people dying from radiation-induced cancers than having the nation have an economic collapse.
I have heard also about, for example, Australia, that the expectation is that Australia western part will go below the sea level, and on the eastern part that there is like a chain of mountains that they could get volcanic, so that there
Things are possible, but you know, yeah, and there's the Gordon Scallion maps, the Navy maps. There's all of these maps that show these things. And in the final analysis, there's really no way to predict seismically what the Earth's going to do. You don't know which volcano is going to pop. You don't know which fault line is going to pop, how hard, how long. There's a lot of unknowables. And there's just, in the final analysis, rather than getting a map or somebody speculates about this or speculates about that, what I really advise is do your homework. Seriously, do your homework. They're basic things. Get away from shorelines, get some elevation, you know, a couple of thousand feet. You don't want to go over 5,000 feet, because if you go over 5,000 feet, now you're into high altitude farming. So with shorter growing seasons, and high altitude farming is something that you better know what you're doing if you're going to try that. So typically, I think around 3,500 feet is a really good elevation to look at. So 2,500 to 3,500. If you're far inland, and that is going to depend on lakes, rivers, water basins. Every place is different. But as a rule of thumb, you want good soil, a lot of water, rolling hills. You have those three things: good soil, good, rich, deep soil, rolling hills, a lot of water. Now you have land that you can work with. You can, you know, create a survival community. You can farm it. You know, that's during the tribulation. I mean, there are a lot of folks that have this biblical notion that it's just going to be boom, one big hit, and then, you know, we all pick up the pieces afterwards. No, this is a slow motion train wreck where you're going to have long periods of manageable disruption, and then you're going to have really big events like the pole shift. And then those are going to cause problems, and you're going to have to learn how to work within, you know, that was the reason why with Surviving the Planet X Tribulation, explaining the process of the flyby so people could understand that they're going to have maybe a period of 9 to 12 months between major events that are happening. Well, that gives you enough time to put in a couple of crops. And if you harvest your crops, you can it, you set up cold stores where you can store your things underground, and you learn how to adapt. You're going to be raising pigs and chickens. Like I said, we're going to go back to an agrarian society where we are feeding ourselves, and so that's really important. You know, you get up into a nice hilly area that's nothing but a bunch of rocky, you know, hills, ridge lines, and steep and, you know, the only thing that grows there is mountain goats, you're not going to do too well. So you have to use common sense. You have to think it through. And then when you get there, you got to put your boots on the ground. You got to go walk around. You got to go learn about it and trust your instincts. And if you're looking at properties for survival, you stand in the middle of the property and just go into a still state, get quiet, listen to your inner instincts. And if your inner instinct tells you, here it is, plant the flag, then do it. Plant the flag and plan for the worst and hope for the best.
Mm-hmm. Have you heard that the elites maybe believe that Atlantis will rise again in Atlantic Ocean, and then that New Zealand will be much bigger land? Have you heard anything that they believe?
Well, if Atlantis rises up from the seabed, you know, that would be interesting. Then again, how would we know? I mean, imagine, you know, we're going to have a lot of surface land right now is going to be by radiation, pollution, fires, all kinds of different things. We're going to have pockets of land that are livable. We're going to have large areas that are not. But these lands that are going to rise up from the oceans are really what the elites are banking on. That's what their long-term strategy is, because you have a small continent that rises up from the sea. Now, one of the last things that'll happen is we're going to have a tremendous global rain cleansing process. The planet will cleanse itself. And so you have these land masses that rise up from the sea. Then you have all of this rain, 40 days, 40 nights. What does it do? It rinses away all of the salts on these new continents that have risen. And what you're going to have is soil that's fertile. And what's a good example of that is the Central Valley in California. It's a big food basket for the world, particularly for the United States. And in prehistoric times, it was an inland ocean, which is why it is so fertile. All you got to do is just add water. The nutrients are there in the soil, and you can start raising stuff, because it used to be a seabed. So we'll have seabeds that are rising up to become new dry land. They'll be washed clear of salt. And humanity is going to get off of the old continents, which are going to really, they'll still have a presence there, but post-tribulation, I can see that there will be a real emphasis of the survivors to relocate on these new continents that have risen.
Yeah. So number 8, who do you think are the people, organizations that have been covering up the Nibiru flyby, and what do you think is their agenda?
It's the 1% of the 1% that rule the world. I mean, what, 80, 90% of the world is owned by less than 1,000 people? Okay. For them, I mean, for the elites, it's about control. We're mullets. We're farm-raised fish. We're just here as to serve a function as slaves for them. And what they want is they want to perpetuate their lifestyles. They want to perpetuate their power. They want to perpetuate their mastery over the planet. And that's their goal. And in order to do that, they need to reduce the current population. 7.5 billion is too big to be manageable. Trim that down to, 500 million. Now you got manageable numbers and as many bodies as you need to serve you in utter total luxury.
Yeah. Do you believe sudden pole shift will occur with flooding all over the world, and when do you think that the equator will be changed, and that there will rise up new lands above the sea level after the pole shift? Who should receive the new lands do you suggest?
The pole shift is going to happen when Nemesis has gone from perihelion to the ecliptic. It'll be between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter. And the Nibiru, its outermost planet, will pass between us and the sun. That's when we will have the days of darkness. And that is when we're going to have the pole shift event. And with the pole shift, there's any number of variables. I described this in pretty exhaustive detail in my book, Surviving the Planet X Tribulation.
Thank you. And the last question is about if you were appointed as one world leader for 1 year, like before the Nibiru flyby and after, what would you do so that all people who are expected to live like after the pole shift, after Nibiru flyby, would have a good chance to survive the Nibiru flyby? Do you believe that immediate full disclosure of information about Nibiru flyby would be life-saving on a big scale?
The single greatest force in human history is denial. It's even more powerful than greed. If I were leader, it would be disclosure. And so that people would know, but it would be important to disclose it without creating unnecessary, not in a panic, not to create a panic, but to help people understand it, to walk them through it. And then also as a government to help them to do their relocations and to understand that, if everyone understands it's going to happen, then they're going to get on board and they're going to want to participate in some way or another. And that's honesty is the best policy. That's all. I would just go with honesty and trying to help as many people relocate as possible. But on the other hand, you can take, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't bring the water to the horse. Yeah. So.
Yeah. At least we could stop the chemtrailing next week so that we could see what's going on in the skies.
They're not going to stop chemtrailing. They're going to be doing more and more and more of it.
Yeah.
So they're really wanting to set up as much aluminum in the atmosphere as possible so they are reflecting photons. The planet is warming, all right? And we're being duped into thinking we're on the beginning of a ice age. No, we're not. Now, what got me involved in all of this was in the 90s, I had a travel business in Russia. And I was flying over the pole every winter, go over in December and back in January. I saw the deterioration of the Arctic ice with my own two eyes. And that's the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing today. I saw it with my own two eyes. But on the other hand, I remember one day I was walking through a parking lot where I lived, and there was a jet, and it was spraying chemtrails at 10,000 feet. And you could actually see it coming out in globs, because it's just not condensation. It's just globs of chemicals. And then they are go into aerosol. And I'm watching this thing, and I mean, it's massive. And this woman's walking with her dog, and I just said, wow, look up at what that jet is spraying on us. She looked at me like I had 16 eyes in my head and ran away. So look, chemtrail or geoengineering spraying, as we're supposed to say now, it's there. You can look up in the sky. You can see it. How many people really do? And how many people who do look up to see it believe what they're seeing with their own two eyes? Okay. So if chemtrails, which are there, and this is happening, and people are like, oh, la-di-da-di-da. All right. Come on. That's the reason why I say the number one cause of death will be denial. Number two will be procrastination. Number three will be location.
Yeah, there were a couple of questions from the viewers from previous time. You have almost answered some, but Gary asked, when will the days of darkness hit us?
That'll be during the pole shift when NIBIRU passes between us and the sun.
Yeah, and Clark asks, what constellation can I look towards to see it? Near what other bodies?
Well, I mean, it's coming, it's behind the sun right now, and the sun is going to pass through the 12 constellations of the zodiac. So it's wherever the sun happens to be, that's where you're looking. You're looking around sunrise or sunset, because that's when you're going to look at objects near or behind the sun. And yeah, that's the bottom line. There's a lot of people that believe that the most important constellation will be Ophiuchus, which is called the 13th constellation of the zodiac.
Marshall, thank you so much
You're welcome.
for today, and I wait for your next book. You say in January, so you will have the information on your yoursa.com.
Yes.
Quite soon, isn't it? So we
I
can.
will be. I usually, when I bring out a new book, I have in a special advanced edition that's numbered and signed and personalized. And so that's what I'll be announcing. So there'll be a pre-sale for a special limited edition. And then the book will be available on Amazon, bookstores, and the such. It'll be called Radio Free Earth.
Radio Free Earth. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to it. Okay, Marshall, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Bye-bye.